兰的福祉与和平做出奉献。阿门。
Amen. Members, I'm sure that members would wish to welcome two delegations present in the gallery. Delegates from the Saudi Arabia Shura Council, led by Mr. Khalid Abdullah Al Abdul Tif.
The Honourable Dr. Nick Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The clause that we now debate is in respect to Section 129 of the Electoral Act and the issue of by-elections. And I firstly want to make the point of how significant it is that we have electors, 45,000 people in an area, vote for a Member of Parliament, as they have in this Parliament for over 160 years, and now we are giving the power for a party leader to overrule the decision of those 45,000 voters in a constituency to dismiss that MP and trigger a by-election.
The person affected by that decision has no recourse via judicial review, no recourse under the Bill of Rights Act, and that is the sort of framework we see in the very countries on which this bill is modelled, and I think Zimbabwe is the best country that springs to mind.
Politics is a contest of ideas, and we see that every day here in this debating chamber. As we respect each other's point of view, we respect the philosophies and the convictions, and most of all until today, we respected individual consciences of members of Parliament. But what we're doing today, Madam Speaker, is we're changing all that. We're saying, while there will continue to be a contest of ideas within this debating chamber, under this legislation there will no longer be a contest of ideas within each caucuses. And this sort of legislation puts us in the esteemed company of parliaments like Zimbabwe and Pakistan.
This bill says no, it's not a matter if someone voluntarily resigns. If they get forced and frog-marched out of their party, then they are dismissed from the Parliament. Do you know, Madam Chair, which countries around the world have the provisions that are in this bill? Well, let me list them. The officials provided the advice. They have that law in those wonderful democratic countries. Fellow members, you know those countries that you dream that New Zealand was like? Zimbabwe, Sierra Leone, and Pakistan are the only three countries. Now, Mr. Edelise Galloway thinks it's funny. He thinks it's funny that we are passing a law that will align our democratic, our electoral act with countries like Zimbabwe. I say to him, why are we passing an electoral amendment bill that aligns our democracy with a country like Zimbabwe? And I say quite openly, Madam Chair, Zimbabwe is a corrupt country.
The evolution of Robert Mugabe from a leader who was steering Zimbabwe to a bright economic future to a despot who bled his country dry and disposed of opponents who dared stand in his way. The former Prime Minister stayed on in the country while cautioning against Mugabe's Marxist policies.
If we can change from a government that believes in communism to one that believes in the free enterprise system, then we're fine. We have a wonderful country here.
But with white farmers still owning the bulk of the land, veterans of the war and the unemployed grew impatient. A dispute with Britain over compensation for land redistribution saw farmers intimidated, beaten, or even murdered. Mugabe's government allowed it to happen, then facilitated it and encouraged it, ignoring court rulings that it was illegal.
I'm now going to have an enforcement from Harare to come and take more farms.
How can you surrender something willingly that you've lived on for 60 years? We shall have to sell all the mulata, I suppose, to try and get our money back and this sort of thing, and gum poles and what have you. We'll try and sell all that before we go, and all our tobacco and maize and cattle. and we won't put in a wheat crop, and then we'll wish the comrades the very best of British luck.
Decades of agricultural experience departed, voluntarily or forcibly. The consequence was that a country which was once regarded as the breadbasket of Africa began to starve. Harvests shrank, shelves were empty, and rampant inflation meant currency became virtually worthless.
He thinks it's funny. He thinks you can rip up 330 years of parliamentary rights, of free speech, and he thinks it's funny that his party, who got 7% of the vote, is able to make that permanent change in our electoral law. Is able to make that permanent change in our electoral law. Would a Green Member of Parliament who campaigned and says this provision is undemocratic, is draconian, is a threat to democracy, that's what they say, if a single member of the Green Party finds their conscience, votes against this provision, will they effectively be shown the door of Parliament and be dismissed from this House? That is how serious, Mr. Chairman, the provisions in this part are. I'd also like the Minister in the Chair to address the question of the Bill of Rights, because we at the Select Committee heard not just one, not two, but 23 constitutional experts say that this Clause 5 breaches the most fundamental part of the Bill of Rights relevant for this Parliament, and that is for free speech of members here. And when we had all those experts, you know, the only person the government can find that says it doesn't breach the Bill of Rights is David Parker, who happens to depend on his job as Minister on the passage of this offensive part. So my challenge to the Minister and the Chair, name me a single constitutional lawyer who believes that Clause 5 of this bill is not a breach of that Bill of Rights. And as my colleague Tim McIndoe says, he won't, because there isn't a single one in New Zealand, and that just shows how offensive it is what Parliament is being asked to do this afternoon.
My question is, if the New Zealand Parliament passes a law that is in breach of the New Zealand Bill of Rights, then what recourse have the citizens against the politicians who voted or proposed this? New Zealanders didn't vote in the recent election for any political party to have the power to remove the legally citizen-elected representatives. Surely this demands some sort of action. Are the members of the Executive Council ignoring this issue? Do New Zealand citizens need to put them all, each and every one of them, on notice? And that includes everybody who voted for this bill, those who proposed this bill, including the Executive Council themselves. As head of state, the Queen's assent is required for Parliament to enact bills. Should the people petition the Queen to remove that assent?
I call the Right Honourable David Carter.
Madam Speaker, this is indeed a very, very sad day for the reputation, the international reputation of New Zealand's Parliament and New Zealand's democracy.
I was talking to an Australian Member of Parliament about this provision. His question to me, Mr. Chairman, was, this can't be for real. Not a single party or member of Parliament in the Australian Parliament, in the US Parliament, in the British Parliament, in any Parliament in Europe, in any real democracy, would ever consider a measure such as that proposed here in Clause 5. Let's say a member of New Zealand First says, actually, I believe we should stand by our policies on 1080, where they campaigned on it being banned. What happens if a member of New Zealand First finds their conscience, says what they would do, and votes against 1080? Out they go. They're gone. If they find their conscience on any number of issues, Mr. Chairman,
The Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
Mr Chairman, what this bill does is actually give licence for party leaders to wield even more power than they have right now. And what is so offensive that we have in Clause 5 is the complete lack of any real checks or balances on the power to dismiss a member from this House. And now we are giving the power for a party leader to overrule the decision of those 45,000 voters in a constituency to dismiss that MP and trigger a by-election. And what we are wanting to do...
I'm sorry to interrupt the Honourable Member, but it has come time for me to report progress.
Chairman?
Mr Speaker, the committee has considered the Electoral Integrity Amendment Bill and reports progress. Mr Speaker, I move that the report be adopted.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. Those of that opinion will say aye. Contrary, no. The ayes have it. This bill is set down for further consideration in committee next sitting day.